Welcome to the Nerve to Lead podcast. Here we explore power, pleasure, leadership, identity, belonging, parenting, and couplehood, and explore stories of navigating through life, finding both authenticity and attachment through the common lens of the nervous system. I am your host, Sangheetha, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about leadership and why there is a prerogative for leaders to work on attachment systems and neuroscience. When we say leadership, I think there is a lot of science and research about leading. A lot of times we equate leading with building high-performance teams, having vision, motivating, all of that. And I want to kind of zoom out that a little bit. We can think of leadership in traditional sense of corporate achievement and power and going up the ladder in a corporate sense, or starting up or being an entrepreneur in that sense. But we can also think of leadership as just people that are committed to making change, whether it's external or internal, whether it's creating social impact, community leaders, or people in our homes and in our communities who are committed to leading with their bodies in an embodied way. I think, again, a lot of coaching, executive coaching, coaching modalities around leadership, I think, have very little to do with the body, if at all. And now that field is growing, embodied leadership. So it's either that, or then we talk about trauma-informed leadership, which again talks about trauma in a singular sense. However, I think the missing piece is to really work at it at an individual as well as the collective level. And for us to do that, we need to understand power. And when we talk about power, we usually think of power in context. If we think of power, we need to think of systems that either confer or not confer power on beings. We need to sit and reckon with collective systems that drive how much, or if at all, power individuals have and what it does to your nervous system. So power is a very early attachment concept. Okay, so when our nervous systems are being gestated in utero and through early infancy, a nervous system can be built either for survival or for thriving. So a developing infant has many neurological prerogatives. We call it nervous system nourishment and nurturing, giving the right vitamins at the right time from a nervous system standpoint. A huge piece of that is attachment, co-regulation, attunement, really attuning. Attuning is different from attachment. Attuning is, I'm going to stay with you long enough to really understand what you want. Okay, so attunement, mirroring, accurate mirroring. I'm going to mirror you back to yourself, right? Instead of projecting me onto you, right? And then there is needs, stories around existence. Am I allowed to exist? How do I feel about my existence? Stories about needs. Am I allowed to have needs? What happens when I have needs? Do I feel okay to express them? And then what happens when they don't get met? And layers of shame, etc., which form a part of very early neural pathways of development. Okay. And then we have autonomy, which from a body perspective, when we're all born, the baby physically does not understand that they are different from their caregiver, the mother, right? Because we were actually the same person in utero, right? So it is only through attuned caregiving, mirroring, touch, input, that slowly the baby begins the process of differentiation and then individuation at a neurological level, driven by sensory input, movement, touch, and later narration, words. So autonomy is another neurological stage where one begins to assert themselves. So if any of these developmental stages were not met with the right nourishment, we then develop adaptive strategies which are either overbounded or underbounded, okay, in a bodily way. So what that means is, now if I could be holding my body very rigidly and holding everything in as a way to control the autonomy piece, or I could just let go and be floppy. Why does all of this matter? Is because your early attachment stories are carried in the nervous system if they have not been worked on and rewired for consistency and safety. What I mean by that is our nervous systems are very resilient with this idea called neuroplasticity, which means that they can be rewired for thriving rather than surviving with the right kind of work, which is what we do in session. But when leaders don't understand this, then they don't invest in it for themselves, then we approach leadership from a survival perspective rather than the thriving perspective. The other thing that does is then we don't reckon with the idea of power as a bodily concept, the way we hold our bodies. This is not about conflict, communication, workshops. This is very early developmental stories that our bodies are carrying with respect to power. Therefore, we could find leaders whose bodies come in with a bodily experience of power being absolutes, okay? So that it's either power over or powerlessness. Then that gets in the way of how we lead and how we show up, both in a systemic sense as well as an individual sense. Therefore, I think it's the prerogative of every leader to invest in this, because early attachment sets the scene for how you hold power. Are you able to hold enough power in your body? How much? Or do you yo-yo between power over or helplessness? Right? And are we ambivalent about power? This is a big thing. Leaders find ourselves grappling. High achievers, it's the same thing. Whenever you are growing and making an impact in the world, at every stage, you're reckoning with personal power and collective power and how you hold it and how you use it. This is huge. And now, a small break to talk about more resources. We've created an assessment for high-functioning workplace stress, which you can download and use by clicking on the link in this episode's show notes. And now, back to the conversation. A lot of us are carrying power ambivalence and privilege ambivalence. What I mean by that is, I am carrying a lot of ability or choice to do things, okay? And sometimes what happens is when we have power and we come from early wiring where our bodies are looking at power as binaries, right? Perpetrator, victim, that binary, then it can be really scary to hold choice and power. And that shows up in interpersonal relationships as well. And it definitely shows up in leadership about this ability to hold. And we've all seen the generation of wounded leaders, a lot of very wounded leaders with very abusive early attachment wiring. And this is an extreme case, right? So who grew up being raised by one or more narcissistic parents, where there was a power abuse at a very early age, and the child didn't really get seen or mirrored back accurately in who they were, like Donald Trump. Like a lot of dictators, for example, had very abusive, neglectful / hostile early wiring experiences. So with that, what happens is then when we become leaders, it becomes very wounded leaders, right? Who then go on with their unhealed nervous system to be the kind of leaders that are actually detrimental to the world, or leaders that you don't hear about are the ones where that turns inward, and then we end up harming ourselves and harming our ability to be leaders, where we get stressed and burnt out and just want to run away with any form of power at all, which comes with lots of autonomy, and then the cycle continues. Which is why I think it is absolutely important for anybody who wants to be a leader in any sense of the word to really reckon with early attachment systems, your own. And people think that when we talk about early attachments, especially in a therapeutic or a coaching sense, and this is very like a Western way of saying it's all your parents' fault, and it's all. We're not talking about caregivers. We're working 2 or 3 levels down. It is not about, just wanted to say that most caregivers, or a big majority of caregivers, think that they're doing the right thing for the children, but their behaviors and attachment is also being driven by their own stories, but also the very real survival energy, even economic survival, that is reality for most people in the global South. In addition, if you're not a cishet white male in a white majority country, a lot of your body is going to be driven by freezing or fawning or appeasing when faced with power binary. So therefore, trauma healing or nervous system regulation is not a one-size-fits-all. And whereas most coaches or trauma specialists tend to be cishet white, and that's not the problem. My point is that there is so much of nuance when you work with a body that is anything other than an able-bodied cishet white male, because the systems of training and how we approach therapy / coaching are also defined by that. My work is very color and privilege and power based, because then that's where we're really holding space for how the collective shows up in your body. So again, leaders, high achievers, by the time they come to me, they have invested a minimum of, I would say, like $50,000 to $100,000 in constantly learning, getting enrolled in the next course, preparing for the next big brand opportunity. So hiring executive coaches, mentors, all of those things. And when you think of investing in the nervous system, it's profound. It's like, wow, this is the missing piece that finally connects all the dots of my life together. So so that's why I think anybody who wants to make any change, be a leader in their personal life, break intergenerational patterns for themselves or their loved ones, wants to show up to be a better parent, better spouse, heal from power binaries, or just wants to show up differently in the world, renegotiate a relationship with power that you can authentically reckon with, you should definitely book a call and let's talk. Thank you for joining me today on Nerve to Lead podcast. The music you hear in this podcast was created by Soundcreed. You can find their link in the description. Thank you to Vaishnavi and Pavitra in Team Sangheetha for producing and editing this podcast. Did this episode resonate with you? If it did, please share it with your friends, family, co-workers, or clients. We would also love to hear from you. Drop us a note on www.sangheetha.com somatics.com.